Yeah.
All right, guys, y'all ready to get this rolling? Michael reached out. It's been a few weeks. We were at the front door talking about work and life and my personal testimony. And little did I know that that conversation would lead to a request to get up here and talk. So in no way am I up here to preach at anyone. But I do want to share my testimony, how we got here, what my journey has been to get to this point, and then I guess some tools that I use to try to stay away from where I was the first 43 years. So I'll share with you where most of my study has come and what's helped me in the last really 3-4 months. It's the book of James. The Christianity in Action, I guess is the best way to call it. That's my coach's Bible that I got from one of my FCA mentors. That's what it calls it in the beginning. It gives a description of the book, and it's Christianity in Action. And I've heard it called just obedience to God in the real world. So can you guys hear me good without this mic? Mm-hmm. Okay. So my name is Nick Robertson. I've been at New Season a little over, Easter was 2 years. So I am 44 years old. I'll be 45 in August, and I'm originally from Rome, Georgia. I grew up as a son of missionaries. My dad in 78 was asked to go with, if you guys remember Carpenters for Christ in those days, to go and build churches, those kind of things. So my dad went to Lake Placid, New York in 78 and built a Baptist church there. I was born in 79, and in 1982, he was asked to move to Lake Placid and help pastor the church. I didn't know really until about 4 years ago why he was asked to go, but it turns out the pastor of that church had an affair with my aunt, and it's just this long Jerry Springer type story. So again, I didn't know that until about 4 years ago when I mentioned it, and Dad's like, "Yeah, I've never told you why we moved there." I said, "No, Dad, I had no idea." So I was baptized by my dad. I was 7 years old in Lake Placid. And obviously, I realize, as I'll tell you in a moment, that was more symbolic and not necessarily me making a decision to walk in Christ. But point being, I grew up in a very church-based life. It was Sunday mornings back then, Sunday night church, Wednesday night church. We were in it all the time. So the way we found New Season was getting my kids involved in church. And we knew that was the biggest priority because, as you'll hear from my story, there was a lot of wayward time, many, many wayward years, so I cannot imagine where I would be now if I had not had that background. So, like I said, he baptized me when I was 7. We stayed there another year and then moved back to Rome, Georgia, because he realized that the missionary life was going to be too hard for what some of his goals were. So we came back here. He worked in Lindo Manufacturing, went to Shorter College, worked third shift, went to Shorter College, graduated magna cum laude at 34, I guess, by this point. So hence you'll hear the reason. My first college attempt was at Shorter College, and that went really well. So we grew up at First Baptist Church of Rome. Again, always in church, always youth trips. What my parents did as vacations was take us on our youth mission trips in the summer. So that was, we laugh now that he's actually on vacation this week, was going to be here to hear this and felt bad about it. I was like, well, I think you've given enough of your vacation time to go on church mission trips. But that was a way to take the whole family. I got to go as a younger kid because my brother was older, and then my little sister, same thing. So we grew up doing that. So I went to school at Rome High School, and I decided that I was going to go to Shorter College, stay close to home, and grow up a little bit. So that first year was awesome. I did really well. Grades were well. I was still behaving as a good child, but I decided, and you'll see me wear this hat today as a reminder for not to go, that I wanted to go to Carrollton and hang out with my buddies. So just to keep it short, the way I describe it to you, my kids, is my business ventures began when I was in Carrollton. I got with the wrong roommates, and I should be standing here today as a multiple convicted felon, and by the grace of God, I was not. So I was in Carrollton for about 9 months, and we had gotten in a little bit of trouble, and I was supposed to be in class, and I answered my phone. This is when cell phones had just started coming out. I answered my phone, and my dad proceeded to read to me the front page of the West Georgia Times, Adam Charles Youngblood, who was my roommate, and about his arrest and what had happened. So in that process, my dad was like, all right, you got two choices. You can keep going, or you can come back home and let's figure this thing out. So I decided it was time to come back home. So we shut it down and moved back home. And about a week later, I spent some time, about 6 weeks, living at home and trying to figure out what needed to happen from that point. So that kind of started, I guess, the days of Kelton started we'll call it 15 years of completely wayward. So I guess the best way to describe my Christianity at that point was seasonal. It's like baseball. I was a baseball player all the way through high school. So in season, and when I was dating a certain girl or doing certain things, I would go to church. Outside of that, take the fall off, take the summer off, those kind of things. That's the easiest way I can describe how we were living. So luckily for me, I knew that I wasn't going to be able to fix college. That wasn't what I needed to be, so I wanted to go to work. So I went to work at O'Charlie's restaurant in Douglasville, and I was done with women. I was done with all that, and my wife, Amanda, we have been married now 18 years. Walked in as a server, and that's 23 years ago, so here we are still. So that's how my restaurant career started. So Amanda had never, I shouldn't say never, very rarely been in church. So our combination of I was enjoying myself and her lack of Christian background really manifested itself over the next, call it 10 years. So our lifestyle was partying. We had a great time, partying. And then I decided we were going to move to Jason's Deli, change my career, and move to Jason's Deli. So we spent the first 3 years there and got married, and it was time we were going to move to Chattanooga and open a store there. So we moved to Chattanooga and had a child. So again, we're completely away from church. I can tell you it was probably, I don't think we attended a church service for probably 10 years. Something like that. We may have, I would go home for Christmas Eve or maybe at Thanksgiving and visit, and we would go. But as far as my activities, very, very rare. So when make a long story short, the whole corporate career days, I was asked to move back to Atlanta, spend a year in Atlanta, and then head to Raleigh, North Carolina. So we came back to Atlanta. This is where, when I look back on some of God's grace on my life, how that started. So Amanda at that point was about 8 months pregnant, and my supervisor wanted me to move. So I came back and lived in a hotel in Kennesaw with Amanda being pregnant. I went home at Thanksgiving. She was due with Tanner, who is now 13, will be 14 in December. He was due at the end of January, maybe first week in February. So I go home for Christmas, and what would normally be get up with Reese, open gifts, do our Christmas thing, and then I'd start to drink whiskey. That particular day, that particular Christmas, I poured myself one cocktail, and I didn't feel good. I just felt off. And Amanda was really tired, and my daughter, who at that point, I guess Reese would have been almost 4, was really tired. So we fell asleep, and we napped for 4 hours. We woke up, and Amanda looks at me, and she's like, my water broke. I was like, there's no way. Like, it's supposed to be the end of January, maybe February. And she's like, well, I'm pretty sure it did. So at that point, we had people lined up. This was our second child. We knew we needed to be ready to go, but it was Christmas Day, and it was an ice storm. They call it snow around here. We had snow in Chattanooga, but here in Hiram and Rome, this was 2010, it was an ice storm. So when I reached out to my folks, it took them 4 hours to get to Chattanooga from Rome. By that time, it was literally took her to the hospital, realized the baby was coming, took Reese back home, called a friend who just happened to be able to help us, left Reese back, went out, scrubbed in, and Tanner was here. So way, way, way early, and in 4 hours, we had another child. The reason I say that was the first grace of God is Amanda had already been on to me about my smoking and my drinking. And like I told you earlier, on a normal Christmas day, by 7 o'clock in the evening, sadly, I would have been unable to drive to the hospital. And on that particular day, there were no cabs. Nobody was out driving. So it was the first time God saved me from her wrath. And like we joke all the time, Amanda can get you. Don knows her pretty well. So that was kind of the first one. I look back of God saying, hey, wake up, wake up, wake up. didn't listen. Tanner was in ICU for 10 days, and it was time the doctor then was like, you guys need to move. He knew we were planning on moving, so we got him out of the hospital, waited a week, moved back to Atlanta. Spent a year here in Atlanta, and in talking with my dad now, our constant conversation, has been praying for us for well over a decade. So he reminds me of that now that I have Tanner, who is me junior, that these days are going to come, especially when he branches out, and I got to prepare myself for it. So anyway, we're going to go to Raleigh. So it's going to be Amanda and I. Tanner at this point, we've been here almost a year. Tanner was just shy of a year old, so we moved to Raleigh. We get in our house in Raleigh, and Tanner stands up and starts walking. So as we say, proverbial all hell broke loose in our house. We're by ourselves, no family, no friends. I was working constantly, and things just started to get crazy. Financial issues, marital issues, just constant stress. So what I didn't tell you in the beginning of the story is Amanda had followed my career the whole way. When we moved to Chattanooga, she had just gotten into radiology school. She decided she wanted to follow my career path, so she quit that. We moved to Chattanooga the day we closed on our house. The person who was supposed to be doing our loan was out sick, so the general manager of SunTrust at that branch did our loan and fell in love with Amanda and offered her a job and got her into banking. So she spent those 5 or 6 years moving her way up through banking. When it was time to come back to Atlanta, SunTrust at that point was booming, so we lived about 5 miles from here, in the neighborhood across from our current neighborhood, and in order just to keep a job, she would drive back and forth to Cedartown for a part-time gig in banking. She did that for a whole year. I can give you one guess what happened when it was time to move to Raleigh. There's not much, that SunTrust Bank was not really there. There were a few branches, but there was no opportunity to work. So we're up there. She doesn't have a job, can't find a job, and she decides that she's being called to go and teach, work with kids. So the first step was to get Tanner into preschool, which we did, Genesis United Methodist Church. And we started as our path to be a good example for Reese. And again, mind you, I'm still not heavily involved in church at this point. We just went to take the kids. So we start going, and we're there. I established a good relationship with our pastor, Pastor Craig, and we're there for probably 3 months. And he approaches Amanda and I both about helping with the leadership of the church. So he asked Amanda if she could be a trustee and if I would do SPRC, which in the Methodist Church is Staff Parish Relations Committee, Human Resources. So our conversation with Pastor Craig was like, I'm the trustee. Like, this is what I do. I manage restaurants. I got that. Amanda's that side. And he said, no, that's not. God's telling me that this is what you need to do and this is what she needs to do. So we agreed. And I will never forget our first SPRC meeting and just listening to the reality of the church staff, the church members, and all of their, I don't call it garbage, it was us, but all of the stuff in their life that was going on. That was the first time I realized, hang on a second. We were brought up, not through my parents, but in that time the Southern Baptist Church was really legalistic. These are the rules. This is what you do. This is what church is about. This is what Christianity is about. So sitting in that meeting at Genesis, I realized that's not what it's about. It's about a relationship. And more importantly, these folks are just as broken, if not, thankfully, more broken at that time than we were. So it kind of opened our eyes. Again, another example of God putting me in a situation to grow. So things are going really well. Career had taken off. Amanda's loving teaching kids. It's going great. So I'm all in. I'm back to, it's season, so now I'm playing year-round baseball. God's taking care of me, so I'm going to give back. We were very active in church, and this is now 2016. And Jason's Deli decides we're going to restructure. So I had the option to keep, at that point I had 9 stores. I traveled about 3 days a week, and I had small kids, and it was take 30 stores and travel all across the country and be gone Monday through Friday, or step back into a different role, live wherever you wanted to live, and be a managing partner and be at home. So obviously I took the choice. This is where the prayer stopped. At that point I got mad. I was mad at God because he was taking it away. So I stopped praying. And let me rewind a little bit. I prayed a lot about it. I knew it was time to get back here. Weirdly, Amanda and I are the only ones that have left. All of our family, my family, her family, we were my dad. We moved away, came back, moved away and came back. So we decided we were going to come back to Georgia and come this route. So guess what Amanda does then? Stops teaching, stops working with the kids, and we come back to Georgia. So at that point, I remained pretty angry with God about how things had been. We had it made, and he took it away. So I didn't realize at that point how blessed we were. Jason's Deli did very well with us, moved us back, and I had a good gig. I was working the least I'd ever worked. I was making more money than I ever made, and about 4 months in, I couldn't sleep. And my dad told me, he's like, well, this is, again, your call. So I decided, I'm going to get back into church. I'm going to start trying to figure out where to go. And it was clear to me that God was like, it's time for you to do something else. So hence the reason you have breakfast here this morning and how that all started. We can talk for hours about how that began, but I decided to leave that cushy job and step out and follow a dream that I had had way previously. So we get into this, start doing the restaurant, and that 4 months later is when COVID hit, pandemic sets in. So I'll give you one guess what happened to my walk with Jesus again. All right, now I'm back in control. I've got this, let's do it. So we struggled through many, many years. We've been in business now almost 5. So struggled, and I felt like, any decision I made was blowing up in my face. I'd had an opportunity to open a spot in Austell and walked away from it a few times over the last 4 years, and that opportunity came up again. And this is where I finally realized it's time to get myself together and stay together. So in September, my dad and I, this past September, we're in the garden working. My dad is 70. At that time, I'm 44 again, and I was about 50 pounds heavier than I am now. And we're in this garden working, and my dad looks at me and he's like, you okay? I'm like, yeah, what do you mean? He's like, you look like you're about to die. I guess I was near heat exhaustion. So that's when God really started to work. I had struggled with weight my whole life. There's things I didn't want, and he just physically is like, all right, you got to get yourself together. So we spent the next few months getting right physically, and then fast forward to January. I had known from doing some reading of scripture that I was being called to get together and stay together and keep it together. So I decided our fast here came up January 15th, and I'd signed up for it last year, and the reason I knew I did is because I went to search my emails to find if I could sign up, and guess what's popped up? All the emails from 3 weeks of last year. It's like, all right, I'm going to do this. So January 15th, I start the fast. I will tell you that it was the most rewarding spiritual experience I've ever had, and the hardest. There were a couple times a week I was in my bed crying, shaking. I guess it was, as my dad says, a lot of just all the junk coming out. So I met with Steve once, spoke with him, and then Thomas and I had established a friendship because my kids were active in church. And Thomas came in to have lunch with me January 29th, and about 2 hours later he asked me the question that Stephen asked over and over, do you know that you know that you know? And my answer was, no, I don't. So I can tell you that I really became an on-fire Christian January 29th of this year. Did not get easier. In fact, it got harder. My wife and I walked through the biggest financial storm we've ever been through. I could have made other decisions. If I had looked at how my career had been, I'm a money guy. Money, status. Money, status. And luckily, God had blessed me with a whole lot of that over my corporate career. And the decisions I made to go into this, at the time I thought were the right decisions. I didn't pray about them. We just gambled on ourselves and put everything on the line. And guess what happened? Pandemic hit, and I gave it all. It was all gone. And we could have turned to someone else and asked for help. We had a huge network. I could go and borrow money and do it, but something told me, don't. Just stay the course, stay the course, stay the course. So Amanda and I walked probably about 4 weeks of, we didn't know how we were going to pay the mortgage. We didn't know how we were going to pay the rent at the restaurant. It was a choice of pay the employees or pay yourself. So we prayed, and we paid our employees and stayed right. And I can tell you that what has transpired in the doors that have opened since then, it's been wild. And I tell people this all the time. God knew that if I had looked at it from a money standpoint a year or two ago, I would have made some changes because I wanted to get my money back. And a lot of what I was doing was to get money back. But at this point, it was more about I want my life and I want peace. And I slept better through that entire, call it 2-month time period than I had slept the previous 15 years. So I finally had a peace that I thought I had time and time again. So the reason I tell that story is if it can happen to me with the background that I have and come up, it can happen to anybody. And I have so many friends who think they got it, but they don't have it. And I guess my biggest challenge and how I can ask you guys to pray for me is how do I get past that old, especially the friends of old, and help them see that it really is a change. I think the hardest thing for me is some of the guys in this room have been pastors, devout Christians for a long, long time. So how do I hold credibility with those folks? And I'll tell you how, and that was reading the book of James. So at this point, I'm going to share with you guys some of the verses that stuck out to me and what got me through those really hard weeks. And if you have not read the book of James, the two that I was told to read was the book of James, the book of Philippians. And if you can just read those two, then you'll get it all together. It's hard. It's probably the most challenging thing I've done. My dad also told me, stop praying for patience. If you pray for patience, you're going to get the test you want. So I don't pray for patience anymore. So again, I had a little slideshow to make it easier, but I'm going to read these to you guys. The first one is James 1, 2-8. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith, with no doubting. To the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed. I can't believe my glasses on. Tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. And I'll reference a sailboat here later. I want to be a sailboat. I don't want to be a cargo ship. And one of the verses I'll share in a minute is why, but I don't want to be that sailboat. Just because you're going by the wind doesn't mean you're just all over the place. A lot of my discussion has been, ships have a very small rudder, and just a very small adjustment can take it in a whole different course. So as you've seen what happens with cargo ships recently in our world, once they get off of course, there's no slowing it down. So I want to take this and apply it. And the way I do that is to remind myself just to be a sailboat, to go with the wind and let the wind take me with the right direction where I'm supposed to go. The next one was really hard. Steve had preached on this, and I feel like I could hear God talking to me in all of Steve's messages. The generational curses. I'm a Robertson. We have anger issues. That's just who we are. Well, as we've learned in my studies, that's not who we are. So this is what I have to remind myself all the time. James 1, 19 and 20. Know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. For the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. So if you ever ask what my biggest struggle is, that's it. I can snap, and I have unfortunately, my tongue is spot on, and I can slice someone up one side and down the other, just like that. So I cannot tell you how many times I've had to default back to this verse. And really where I default back to is daily devotions in the morning. I've tried, this week's been a struggle, and my week was a struggle. I didn't get up and do it like I should do every morning, leading into a day like this, and probably should have. I felt it all week. I realized that if I try to deviate from that plan and do it in the afternoon, it don't happen. If I do it later in the morning, it doesn't happen. I got to do it at 5 a.m. when everybody's asleep, and it's just me and the animals. That's it. Just me and the animals and God. So I listened to Charles Stanley. My attention span's about 20 minutes, which is why I'm trying to make sure I'm talking about that. Usually his messages on that app is about 20 minutes long, and he speaks in a way that is very similar to how Steve is very scripturally based. So that's really how I found James. I can't tell you what date it was. It was during the fast, maybe a week or two in, when he did a lesson on James. I can tell you because it's in this book, but that's when I really started to kind of dive in and read. So the next one that really sticks out, and we're still stuck in the first chapter of James, so that should tell you how much is in that book.
Oh, yeah.
James 1:22-25. But be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man observing his natural face in a mirror. For he observes himself, goes away, and he immediately forgets what kind of man he was. But he who looks in the perfect law of liberty and continues in it, and is not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the word, this will be blessed in what he does. What I realized in reading this one is God gave me a great ministry. I have a dining room full of people all the time who are broken. And from in the beginning of the process, I was worried about, man, you gave up so many opportunities. I work in a broken industry. In my corporate job, I call it access to some of the most broken, dependent, drug dependent, just broken people, and I kind of let those waste away. So my goal moving forward is to make sure that, number one, my employees know what we're about and how we operate, and then number two, that our guests know what we're about. Don's eaten with us many times. He's probably seen most of the transformation and the feel of our. We studied at Jason's Deli. It was the smell of the place. The smell of the place for the last 3 years wasn't good. The smell of the place now is, I can't tell you how many times we get asked about who we are. So it's now it's my ministry. I get random people every day, regulars every day. They give us a chance to show, to be a doer. It doesn't mean I stand and preach to them. It doesn't mean I stand over them and read Bible verses. It means I show them what we're about, and then I do ask, when's the last time you talked to God? When's the last time you prayed? Those opportunities that have popped up, and there are some that are not comfortable, but I feel like I'm being called to act, and that ties back to one more Charles Stanley message, and I put this on Facebook. Some of you folks I'm friends with probably saw it. One thing he said that stuck out to me is we have to have, in order to have spiritual growth, we have to have instruction and involvement. Without instruction or without involvement, you're not growing. So what are those three things? His three things said is, number one, love others, the great commandment. Number two, witnessing to others. Probably my hardest thing to do, because I don't want to feel like, again, I said this earlier, I don't want to feel like I'm standing over someone and telling them how they should be behaving. They certainly shouldn't listen to me. It took me this long to get here. And then number three, serving others, the great commitment. So I love people, so I got that one down, and I have a chance to witness every single day to people I know, to people I don't know, and obviously we have a big chance to serve. And one word he shared in his message is diakonos, which the word deacon comes from. You know what that word means? Back in Bible times, they were servers. Essentially, they were today's equivalent of someone who waits tables. So that's the reason that message stuck with me so much, is this is my role as serving somebody a meal can be and should be just as important as someone who's a deacon in a church ministering to those. We have the same opportunities. Another verse, James 3, 4 and 5, which ties into the ships. Look at ships also, that they are great. They are so great and are driven by strong winds, are still directed by a very small rudder wherever the inclination of the pilot desires. So also the tongue is a small part of the body, and yet it boasts of great things. See how great a forest is set aflame by such a small fire. That was another way of God showing me, man, there are certain ways to do it, and although your actions, maybe you got to watch what you say constantly. It's not that we're being watched, it's just we just have to be careful. So we're also, Robert says, we worry all the time. My wife is the biggest worrier, and she's 1A, I'm 1B. Dawn's laughing because we tease her all the time. What I can tell you in the last 3 months, I don't worry anymore. Even through some of the hardest times at this point, what? It didn't do any good. And now when stuff comes my way, like I told you this week, I stayed off of my devotionals, done religious like I had been. And yesterday I was like, I'm going to sit down when I get home today and work on my message for tomorrow. And some of you heard me talking earlier. We had a 10.5-hour plumbing issue at the restaurant yesterday. So that started at noon. And finally at 5 o'clock, I was like, okay, God, I see. But you know what that was for me as another example that I'm a control freak. I like to plan and go this way. And it was another way for him to say, look, let go. Just think about the things that you've learned over the last, call it 4 months, 5 months, and talk about those. That's your testimony. So I didn't worry about it. And I sat down, and it was crazy to me how it flowed, how it all came out, and how I knew what I need to say. Is it easy to get up here and talk about transgressions? No. But if I'm going to be a good example to my children and those around me, I got to be honest. I got to talk about where I was and what we did and what happened here. So Steve talked a lot about grace lately, so I was trying to find an acronym for grace, and I found one. The main, you guys have probably heard, the main one I've seen is God's riches at Christ's expense. I have to constantly remind myself of what Jesus did for us and what that allows for me to do. And the least I can do is look forward, push forward, and give it everything I have. So the last verse I have for you guys, this was day 3 of my fasting with the church. I always want to look back. What if, you heard me say it earlier, what if I had had these opportunities to witness to these people and all these broken people? Luke 9:62, Jesus said to the man, no one who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God. So my point is, forget about all that, look forward. If my messed up story and I can forget and push forward, we all can. So that's my challenge for you guys today is forget about all the junk behind you, look forward and go. That doesn't mean don't use it as a guide, but it simply means don't keep looking back on it. That's done. There's nothing you can do to change it outside of what you're doing in the future. My plan at this point, I get a lot out of music. I can't tell you how many times songs, I know that's how God talks to me. I was going to play for you guys Hallelujah anyway. And I'll give you one guess after yesterday's long day. 10:47 last night, I was about 3 miles from the cafe, listening to the fish. It was commercials. I'll give you one guess what song came on. Wow. So it was, again, God's way of saying, hey, just the signs are there. Just listen. Okay, so the last thing I want to share is praying. One of my hardest things to do is praying. I felt like a lot of my prayer was, I don't want to call it forced, but yeah, forced. Oh, I got to do this, and this. So what I know with myself and my family and friends, we don't pray for each other enough. So James 5:16 says, therefore confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective. James 5:16. So my challenge to you guys today is to pray for each other. The prayer I want to close us with is from Colossians 1:9 through 12. There was an entire Charles Stanley series about this, and he went through and gave a prayer. I kind of modified it a little bit. So this is the prayer that it hangs on my bathroom mirror. Do I pray it every day? No. Should I? Yes. The most challenging thing he said was to pray it for somebody else and see what happens. And I will tell you, when you start doing that, just be prepared for the onslaught. So I'll close us with a word of prayer. Okay? Heavenly Father, fill me with the knowledge of your will for my life, with all spiritual wisdom and understanding. I want to be able to walk in a manner that is worthy of you. I want to please you in all respects. I want my life to bear fruit in every good work and increase the knowledge of who you are and the way you operate. I want to be strengthened with all power according to your glorious might for the attaining of all steadfastness and patience in my life. I want to be able to joyously give thanks for what you have already done in my life and for the works and the blessings still to come. I want to walk in your strength daily and live according to your will, being a light to those around me. Father, I'm resting in your power, and I ask you to clothe me with the armor of God, for you are greater than anything that may come my way today, and you will see me through. May I walk in such a fashion that the weight of my life bears influence on each person around me today. In your holy and precious name, amen.